So I like to welcome our fellow panelists today. We have a very rich group of panelists joining us today from UAE and also from UK. So first of all, I like to welcome the person who is very far away from us, Michelle, she's here. So Michelle Hazelton is the managing director of Andes Pink, and Andes Pink is a specialist organization in the learning experience. And she is also co-founder of a former organization, Lucidity Rocks. And she is a subject expert in self-directed learning, enabling continuous learning process. She deals with global clients in order to upskill and reskill their team. So I am very honored to welcome Michelle to this program. Michelle, you like to add some thoughts and also a quick brief introduction from your side also. It will be helpful for the audience.
Thank you very much, Fiby. I really appreciate being invited along today and to talk to you about this very, very important topic. Andes Pink is a really interesting tool in the mix with learning technologies and learning experience. So it's fantastic to see that it's really coming into its own in this last year. Excuse me. So my experience in the past has been around product management, and then I moved into learning technologies, and then the co-founders of Andes Pink invited me to be the managing director of Andes Pink a few years ago now. So we really accelerated our innovation and growth over this last year using technologies like machine learning and AI to really bring relevant micro learning content, essentially, because what we curate from the web is essentially micro learning into the platforms where your end users are. And feel free to ask me more questions about that later on. I won't go into lots of detail now, but thank you very much. And we're actually one of the companies that are doing very well from this. I appreciate there's many that aren't, but we are we're on the upward curve, if you like, as a result. So very grateful for that for us.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you.
I like to welcome Adam Wadda. Adam takes care of Standard Chartered Bank, and she is the regional head of people and capability in the African and Middle East region. Adam has been in different roles with Standard Chartered over the years, heading the learning department in the UAE and MENA region, country head of human resources, and she has been into various activities with nonprofit organizations too. So we will be having an international flavor with her expertise in this program. So I like to welcome Adam. Adam, just like to also hear from you a few words.
Thank you very much, Fiby. I'm really honored to be invited, actually. And I've been looking forward to it. I think as an international bank, Standard Chartered, we sort of spearhead part of the things that are happening on the digitization, on the new technology boom, looking at innovation, looking at how do we also speed product to market through utilizing part of the future technology and looking at future skills. How do we build that? How do we build a craft for today, being the best? How do we prepare for tomorrow and make sure that people are reskilled, but also how do we go beyond that and make sure that these skills are actually skills that are sustainable and people can actually then continue to be the best that they can be. So I am actually quite excited. Like Michelle said, also feel free to ask me more around that. And then we will discuss further around what we have done as a bank, where we're heading to, where we have been, and what is our main concentration. I think last year to this year, there has been a major leap in the things that we do around agility and the concept of trying to self-learn and trying to build that habit of making sure that you take care of your own skills and how that works out. So thank you very much, Fiby. I'm excited for the conversation to continue from here.
Thank you, Adam. And next we have my close friend and senior colleague from Abu Dhabi Islamic Bank, Mahmoud Tayser. Mahmoud, I know him for a very long time. So since 2010, he's with Abu Dhabi Islamic Bank, taking care of the learning function. And he has been into different roles within different organizations in the region, like Hydra Properties, Tamir, Dubai Islamic Bank, Mashreq, KPMG. So he comes with a lot of project experiences in the learning side, and especially in creating the competency framework. So Mahmoud currently he's the head of Banking Academy of Abu Dhabi Islamic Bank, a regional bank in the region. So without further ado, I like to welcome Mahmoud for this program, and it is an honor to have him too. So Mahmoud, I like to give you an opportunity to share some aspects on what you are observing in the region and from your experience.
Yeah, good morning, Phoebe and the panelists and the attendees, and Ramadan Kareem. Thank you for having me. I think this is very much a hot topic that we're all going through in all industries. I don't believe only in banking, but all industries. And this is the new normal that we all have to adapt to. I think we just need to figure out the best way moving forward and how to make sure our people are up to speed with this constant changes in technology that's happening in our personal and professional life. And I look forward to having a fruitful conversation today.
Thank you, Mahmoud. So without further ado, we are moving into different questions. And friends, you can also raise we usually have the 12 o'clock window for the questions. But again, if there are relevant questions which you think, okay, this should be taken up at this moment, please raise your hand, or you can bring it to the chat. Thank you, Chowki. We have very experienced colleagues and friends who are joining us from different parts of the world. Thanks for everyone. And feel free to use the chat with questions, queries, etc. as and when we move forward. So I was just reviewing one report from LinkedIn on the skills recently. So it was highlighting that there is a shift which happened in the pandemic, especially with regard to division of labor between humans and machines. And it has caused almost 85 million jobs to be displaced. And that is what, as per the LinkedIn report, and 97 million new jobs to be created. So the question which I just like to open with to the panelists, what is the emerging learning experience like in a pandemic environment? So first of all, I like to bring Mahmoud to share his thoughts on this question.
Yeah, thank you, Phoebe. I think the learning experience, we all had to pivot since last year. I think pre-COVID, if you had to talk about digital learning or distance learning, first thought comes to the mind is e-learning programs. And I think with the pandemic, that has shifted towards more different platforms like the ones we're using today, MS Teams and WebEx, where the instructors are now talking and teaching and evaluating these learners on these different platforms. And also the learners itself, staff had to adapt to being able to go to different topics and the complexity, whether it's behavior and technical. So I think the platform of how we do adult learning has changed, and I think it's going to continue in that direction. I don't think it's going to go back. I think parts of it will still be there, or remnants of it. And then also with the youth and the millennials, they're all more engaged in these platforms ever than previous, I would like to say, classical's way of teaching.
Thank you, Mahmoud. So that's from a user experience perspective. Now, from a provider perspective, I like to bring in Michelle at this point. Michelle, how are you seeing this shift happening in the learning environment?
I think that different sectors and different organizations are at different stages of this process. Now, everybody's been thrown in the deep end, which I think is actually a really good thing, because it means that a lot of the bureaucracy that was in place previously has had to move very quickly or even disappear altogether, just to make those decisions to enable people to do their jobs in a very different situation. But it isn't a case of simply taking an e-learning course and converting, or taking a face-to-face course and converting that into a set of slides and then sticking it on a platform and expecting people to engage with it, because it just won't happen, right? So yes, we need that level of engagement, but you also need the content to complement the level of engagement. And the thing that we're seeing is that, you know, the traditional way of creating e-learning courses, which of course are effective in some scenarios and for some use cases, but actually what you need is you need to rapidly respond to the emerging changes and trends that we're seeing all the time. And in order to do that, you need technology to support the platforms that you implement, and you need to encourage people to learn in a self-directed way. So you need to facilitate that with the right technology, but you also need to feed in the right content to be able to do that. So what we're seeing is this emergence of ecosystems. So not one platform to serve all, but many platforms that work in conjunction with each other, with content that complements it, content from off-the-shelf libraries, content from people like Anders Pink that curate it from the web, content that you have put together internally, content from subject matter experts, and then facilitate that self-directed learning with that layer of social learning over the top to really drive people back to the platform and engage them with what they need to learn to progress and to do their jobs in the way that they're now required to do them.
Thank you, Michelle. I will come to a part which you mentioned on content curation, because probably in case the audience would like to know more about that. Just a moment. Before that, I just like to also listen to Adam. Adam, if you like to share what happened in the pandemic environment with respect to your organization.
So just listening to the previous two speakers, it's evident that we all went through a massive change, and just let me spend a few seconds on the bureaucracy part. I think for most of the organizations, they were leaping towards going digital anyways. Finding a hybrid type of working, it's evident that this is the place that we were going. If you look at the way that the younger generation wanted to learn, I think trying to get people to classrooms all the time wasn't something that was working. I remember also having a conversation with EIBFS, and they speaking about how the jump was when they had moved digital during the pandemic, and the amount of participation they had versus the amount of participation prior to the pandemic. It was actually amazing to see the jump, right, Phoebe? So I think getting into that phase of hybrid, yes, we were pushed to that, but a lot of organizations had started the conversations a while back. So as you know, as we go through this, there were barriers. Oh well, how will we adapt to this, and how would this play out? And I think that confidence of jumping to a blended or a hybrid type of learning became the only option. As people were working remotely, nobody was coming to the office. You can't have gatherings more than 5 people face to face. So we were pushed to actually say, okay, so how do we sustain and keep up upskilling and reskilling our population? And in order to do that, we then needed to go virtual, because that was the only way last year. As a bank, we've been talking about having a digital platform that would hold content, just like a YouTube platform, right? Or a Google, where you can go and Google certain content and it will pop up. You can either listen to it, you can read about it, you can watch videos. So I think all of this was something in play prior, but it wasn't out in the front. So I think this gave us an opportunity. Last year, it was actually a good opportunity to say all these things we were speaking around to move learning to the next level. It's right now here. There wasn't an option to not do that, right? But whilst we're talking about experience, I also want to talk about how even we're talking about blended, right? With the e-learnings, with the virtual, with the blended type of learning, we also started seeing that in order to keep the interest of people, we had to move to things like simulations and gamifications and things that, people in their own personal life, they were utilizing. So how do you blend the two, getting people to see learning as something fun, as something accessible, but also something that is engaging? without, having that physical presence. I think this was, for me, this was the highlight of last year when we started moving, to build more simulations and interactive learnings within people, right? Being in virtual spaces. So I liked that the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you. Yeah. So connecting to that previous mention, which Michelle mentioned, that you mentioned about the importance of content curation. So just to help the people in this conference, what do you mean by content curation for the organization? And can you just give some examples or stories which you have seen in the industry?
Yeah, so content curation, there's really a number of different facets to it, because many organizations claim to do content curation, and they're not wrong. However, my interpretation of content curation from our standpoint is that it's about the kind of the dissemination of information to your audience based on filtering, seeking, searching, and making sense of the information that you are then disseminating to your audience. And you can do this manually, of course, by going to Google and getting millions and millions of results, or you can use a tool to help you do that. And that was where Anders Pink came from originally. So when you're using a tool for automation, it's a case of setting it up with sophisticated filtering, from pulling content from sources that are relevant to your audience, but having the ability to manipulate that based on who you're curating content from is really, really important. Because what I see across the organizations that I work with within financial services, but also within many other sectors, is that what one person deems as a quality piece of content curated from the web, which is what we actually focus on, someone else will not. Therefore, you need the ability to be incredibly flexible around how you go about curating. So you have essentially the ability to say the topics that you're interested in. You use the machine learning that's built into the tool to filter that right down into the right categories. You specify where you want that content to come from if you have a white list, or you can go out to a broad list depending on your audience. And then that content just flows in when it's been published. And then when it reaches a certain age and it's no longer deemed fresh or relevant anymore, it then flows back out again. And that the key of that curation is putting that at the point of need for your end users. So feeding it into other platforms. They don't need a different platform to come into just to look at the latest content on anti-money laundering, for example, right? They need that at the point of need where they're going about either their learning, or they're collaborating with their colleagues, or they're doing their work, their daily activities. And that's where the Anders Pink tool can help organizations bringing that fresh content in to the platforms in order to disseminate it to the right people at the point of need. So content curation in a nutshell, the ability to take the mass of information that's published on the web every day, the millions and millions of articles, and filter that right down into something very, very relevant to your audience.
Thank you, Michelle. That's helpful. I think building on that part, I just like to ask Mahmoud. Now we have seen this huge automation boom happening in the financial service sector, specifically, and also in all sectors across the industry. Now, when we see that tech landscape changing, how do you see the shelf life of our skills? Like all of us are having a shelf life of skills. How that is shifting or shifted in this recent pandemic?
Yes, thank you, Phoebe. I think the notion of updating your skills and being up to speed is going to be correlated to the technology, and I can see the technology in our personal devices are being updated literally every week, and I don't see skills lasting more than 12 months, to be honest with you, because things are moving very, very quickly and rapidly. Of course, in banking, there's always going to be a need for compliance and credit and so forth, But with the augmented reality, Internet of Things, and how we will use AI to deal with the customers externally, even in the back office and middle office, the core skills will be there, but you still need to take it up a notch and you need to be relevant. Otherwise, you will be stuck in the old classical ways of how we used to do things before. How we interact with customers is changing. How the customers are looking at the services, at our products is evolving and changing very quickly. It's becoming more efficient. Everybody wants the services now. And I think the challenge for us as many organizations to replicate these services internally in back and middle office. I think most institutions are still catching up internally, but they're much far ahead externally on how to deal with the customers. I think the experience internally has to adapt, and how the operation and the technology, HR, even the learning people don't get caught up in how we do things and how we evaluate things. I think the faster the technology is going, the more we have to move faster with it. Otherwise, you won't be relevant. I think you've seen jobs in banking and other sectors have disappeared, and there's new jobs are coming up. And most of the jobs that are coming up are more related to technology, more into the digital banking, more in the cybersecurity. You see less and less administrative roles. You see less and less service roles. And I think, and less dependency on academic qualification. To be a bit, to put it, I mean, MBA was relevant maybe 10, 15 years ago, but I think if you're working on an app, it's not relevant anymore. I think we need to push the envelope in terms of to how we develop talent, and I think the talent is going to be more skill-based than opposed to having qualification. There's always going to be room for that, for certain roles that you have to have accreditation for. And I think the way the technology is moving on our mobile devices and how we transport and how we buy things is pushing us very fast, and we need to move at that speed, if not much faster than that, to keep up.
Yeah, building on that, Adam, if you can throw some lights on, like we all in the learning process, we reach out to the respective department heads to see the learning needs. So what are you observing when we say that shelf life of skills which they are looking for?
Thank you. I was just double checking if I was on mute, so I'm not on mute. Okay, thank you very much. I think there's a constant evolution of skill set, and I think to remain relevant and to be able to keep up, we need to be agile as end users, but we need to be also agile as people capability teams. When a couple of years ago, when we started talking about fintech, we started talking about learning being driven by AI, 3D robotics, new ways of working. I think the big question was, how would I be impacted, when new skills are being floated in the market? So that realization, I think, being in a space where we question that, either having technical skills or having human skills is a nice to have. I think we've moved way beyond that. When we're having conversations with our business leads, right, on needs assessments, the conversation is always around, what do we require now, as in today, in our craft, but what do we also require in the next 2 to 5 years? Because of the constant evolution, right? You also don't want a stagnant workforce. So it's the preparation on future-ready workforce. How do I get my workforce to be future-ready, to be able to enable growth in the future? So these are the conversations. So if I recall conversations I've had 3 years ago, they were more relevant on what do I need now? What do I need now? Rather than focusing on what do I need in the future. Now the conversation has shifted, right? It's all around how do I make sure that, I am able to have a workforce that is ready in the future, that is future ready and future focused, that is agile enough to adapt, that is able to ensure that as we move through digitization, we concentrate more on innovative pieces. How do we, skills, Mahmoud mentioned cybersecurity, but how do we get also people to be able to aspire to be data analysts, to aspire to be universal bankers, meaning they're able to take multiple roles within the bank and not just one? How do we get them to be reskilled enough to say that I currently don't have these skills, but my aspiration is to be ready to take on a role that is not even in the market, right? It's not existing at this point, but how do I prepare myself for this aspiration? And how do I make sure that I'm able to compete? So I think the conversation with business heads has definitely changed. So now, meaning our needs assessments are mainly driving, if you're looking at learning framework, they're mainly driving, they're mainly being driven by not what your people leader wants you to learn, but what do you want to learn, and how do you get a habit of that self-learning process, right? So in Standard Chartered Bank, we have our learning framework which says 70% of your learning journey should be self-learning. So how do we get, because that's how you build habits, right? That constant doing, that constant being able to find value in nudging yourself and not having others nudge you. So we have a lot of learning that is driven by self. And I think that in itself is evolutionary. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Yeah, so that's something which you coming back to the self-directed learning process, which we are seeing in many organizations. So building on that, there is a question which I just like to ask. Now, there is a responsibility on both sides, the employer and employee. So what are the processes which you are seeing, and what are these responsibilities in this process for the employer as well as the employee? So on both sides, for example, like I'm owning the L&D function, but I'm also an employee. So what are these responsibilities, and how it is being seen in the organization? And I don't have anyone in specific in mind for this one, but it is open.
Can I jump in?
Please go ahead.
I think to follow up on what Adam was saying about self-learning is a challenge for organizations, because not all individuals are self-driven. And with these new technologies, there's a lot of content out there. Now, what people individually would like to learn has to also match what the organization objectives are, because otherwise you're going to have people learning things that's not relevant to the job, or not upskilling them. I think the employees have to be self-driven, and I'd like to call it expert learners. They have to learn what's related to their role and what role they'd like to go for in the future. They have to read more. I think reading is a challenge we have nowadays. The attention span of, I don't know, what is it, 144 characters or less, with learning videos of 2 minutes or less. I think it's challenges to do credit spreading in 2-minute videos. So that's the onus as an employee, and not to go only by doing the bare minimum of, say, money laundry or basically compliance courses. What skills? I think digital skills are going to be the norm. It's no longer going to be just technical and behavior. I think digital skills, whether you're in HR or you're working in finance or corporate banking, it's going to be the same. I think on the organizations, we have to be enablers. We have to provide the platforms, solutions. It's more challenging because everybody needs their own experience. They need to have their own content that's customized to them, whilst at the same time aligned with the organization objective. I think for the organization, we need to make sure also not to be focused too much on how and what channels we teach people, but most importantly, how they apply that on the job. And that's one of the challenges we have. People are learning and teaching and going online, but implementing it on the job and moving the needle in terms of better service, quicker, faster, and growing the business. That's very important and challenging for all the learning and HR professionals.
Thank you, Mahmoud. So yeah, that's something which is interesting to know, that self-learning or self-directed learning sometimes find it difficult to be implemented. And I just want to see it, Michelle, from your perspective as a provider.
Yeah, there's a few points actually that came to mind when Adam and Mahmoud were talking there. So trend that we've seen recently. So what we do is we curate what we call bundles of briefings on trending topics. So the one that we're working on at the moment is hybrid working. So we've got several briefings that we put together from a HR perspective, from the employee perspective, from a manager, and then just a general best practice one. And something that's come up quite a few times recently is around how motivation for employees is a problem. You may have seen it within your own organizations, because people are remote, they don't have the kind of floor walking that happens naturally, organically within an office. Excuse me. So in order to help people with their motivation, what they're doing within organizations is actually giving people a choice on what they want to work on. So this may be still within their department or their team or their job role, but they're saying these are the projects, or these are the tasks, and we, based on what interests you the most, we want you to choose what you would prefer to work on. And then you have a skills conversation. Okay, so you're really interested in that, but we know you have a gap in your skills, therefore we can facilitate that gap with some additional learning. Or how will you upskill yourself as someone who's interested in this and wants to progress in their career, and we're giving you the opportunity to go for this new type of work within your existing team. How will you facilitate your own learning to upskill yourself? So it's kind of putting the onus back on the employee. So instead of saying everyone needs to do more learning, we're saying here is a fantastic opportunity. Take hold of that and upskill yourself and go and learn yourself. Coupled with that is the whole technology piece. So I always bring the technology piece in because I'm so interested in it. But learning experience platforms, I know we'll come on to this in a bit more detail, Fiby, in a while, but just to talk a little bit about that, because it's directly relevant to facilitating self-directed learning. So learning experience platforms at the moment are kind of in their first generation, moving into their second generation. And if people perhaps haven't learned since they were at school or university, or just, you know, they haven't learned on their own for a long time, maybe they just simply don't know how to go about it, right? They don't know, all they know is that scrolling, Googling, and that's about it. And exactly as you say, attention spans are so short, and you know, how much can you really learn from a 2-minute video apart from the absolute high level information that you need to be able to perhaps talk about it a little bit or apply a few skills? So in that instance, we need platforms to really be very, very intelligent around how they're recommending learning in different ways, and not just the 2-minute videos, you know, informative articles from outside of your organization to help them think about not just how it works internally, but how it works in the real world out there in other organizations, so they can apply those skills. And the platforms that are coming to light now that are releasing new features, upgrading significantly, but also the new platforms, LinkedIn Learning Hub, for example, that's coming out later on this year. They have this next generation of recommendations engines which look at the person, the job role, the career aspirations, what they're doing, how they do it, how other people who have had a similar learning journey have what path they've followed and what learning they've done to achieve their goals. And based on that, these intelligent recommendations can be made to help those learners that want to learn and progress but don't really know where to start.
Yeah, that's yeah. It is very challenging, which especially those who have been working in a specific role for a quite long period of time. And this disruption, for example, like I remember in the past, if you ask someone working in a bank, can we have remote work? Many times what we see is frowning. Bank, you are working in a bank and you want remote work, but now majority of functions are doing things in a remote environment, and that shift is huge. So I like to move to Adam. So what are you seeing specifically for upskilling and reskilling in the current employees? For example, the employees who are there with the sector for the last 15 years or so. So what are you observing?
Thank you very much. Just before I respond to that, I think also the previous conversation, I think when Michelle is speaking around the learners, I think one thing that, you know, has been, you know, been out there for the past year has been, at least for some organizations, how do I identify how my people want to learn? Because I think that's the uniqueness of everyone. There are people who, when you give them the material, they actually want to sit and read it. They can read pages and pages and pages of content and they can observe that. There are people like me who, when you make them sit for more than 2-3 hours to read, you've lost them, right? So it's more around, okay, let me instead watch something or let me listen to an audio. So establishing how people want to learn and then making sure that we push that experience towards them is very relevant. So I just wanted to add that part. So I think on the reskilling and upskilling, I think upskilling we've done as organizations for quite a number of years, because again, most of the trainings that we had as a bank were more towards how do I upskill a person on their current role. The conversation about looking at future roles wasn't something that we started until a couple of years ago. The idea was about being the best in the things that you currently do. Now, that is still relevant. I believe that people, when they're doing a job, they should do the best job that they can in the roles that they're in, because that shows success. So that is very important. But because we've done it for so long and not concentrated on what would it look like for this person if they're aspiring for something different, and how do we prepare them to be able to actually compete and be successful in a future role, being in the future role is in existence or it's not even yet established. I think as a bank, when we started doing workplace planning, we started getting business heads to actually have conversations around what the future looks like for them. Which roles do they see that are going to be relevant today, or which roles do they see that are actually going to be redundant tomorrow? You mentioned earlier, Fiby, that 85 million jobs have been displaced and 97 million jobs are coming in to replace those. So this conversation has been ignited, more so last year when we saw a lot of people working remotely and understanding that, oh, actually, I don't need Adam to be in the office to actually provide this service. Maybe this service is actually redundant in my space. But then in addition to that, there's a new service that is now required more. So how do I make sure that I reskill for people to be ready to take those? And there's a cost element to all of this. I think as an organization, we've established early on that it's way more cheaper and efficient to reskill than to go out in the market to always look for people to replace or to hire people for new roles, right? There's a cost element to that. In addition to the cost element, there's also an employee value proposition around that. There's also a reputation for organizations to see that they're actually enabling growth within the organization, but they're supporting people to make sure that they are future ready. So I think in the reskilling conversation, we picked up that there were technical skills that we needed to have as an organization. However, there are human skills that in the future would be so much more amplified, right? So if we're looking at resilience, and I think last year has taught us that this was one of the skills that we needed, not only people leaders, but Pound Bank, everybody needed to possess that, right? In order to survive, you needed to be resilient. So resilience, emotional intelligence, empathy, understanding, the well-being of your teams and making sure that, you prioritize that. So these were all human skills that organizations needed to, come face to face with and say that we find this very important at this stage, right? But again, how do I say that I used to have tellers and I used to have customer service executives, but I'm reskilling them now to be universal bankers. So I am placing them in a position where they can do other roles. They can do other roles apart from tellering. Because if you look at how many branches do we have open globally, right? In any organization, people don't go to banks anymore. Last year, who went to actually a branch to do a service? Everybody's gone digital. So it means that these roles are actually becoming very redundant. So how do I support my current teller population or my current customer service executives to say, I am going to get you in a position where you're actually getting new skills. You're actually building new skills that will be relevant and support your future aspiration as an individual, but also will help the bank. Because it's easier for me to reskill you than to go out in the market and hire fresh. You already have institutional knowledge.
Thank you, Adam. Yeah, so when you were sharing that challenge of, how many number of times you have gone to the branches to do a transaction? Yeah, my answer is very less, maybe one or two in the pandemic year 2020. So thanks for bringing that. So I like to move to Mahmoud. So Mahmoud, so we are seeing, like, for example, new digital banks emerging in the region. Like one example, we have seen Zan, and in Abu Dhabi, we have another organization, and all across the globe, a lot of new fintechs coming up. And this is not only in financial services, but in other sectors also. So I like to hear your perspective. What skills will be key in the reshaped banking and financial sector? What are you observing?
Yeah, thank you, Phoebe. I think this new wave of neobanks is going to be challenging for the traditional banks in terms of offering all-inclusive services from retail and wholesale and so forth. And I think it's taken shape in much more developed financial sectors around the world. In terms of skills, I think besides the typical, corporate banker or, wholesale retail banker, who would like to call technical skills and the behavior skills in terms of how we have emotional intelligence, I think digital skills is the new one that needs to be there across all the organization. And I think it's no longer going to be only pigeonholed to the digital or technology team. I think all departments and all levels need to have some digital savvy skills to be relevant and to be up to speed. I think there's more a need for remote management of workers. I think with the pandemic that has happened, yes, you couldn't work and you had to work from home and so forth. But pre-pandemic, you had people working in different office locations. You had staff working overseas. So this, how you manage people remotely, has become more and more important. How you keep them connected with you, how you keep them engaged, and in learning how you keep your people engaged, because not everybody is engaged. Some of them are actively disengaged. So that will reflect on how they interact with the content and whatever you're giving to them. We talked previously about agility and adaptability, but the key here is to be steadfast and prompt and quick, because the industry is moving quick. And however institutions now that came out of the pandemic, these are the ones that will survive and do much well. So there's no time for procrastination. You have to move very quick and fast to be relevant in this market. Otherwise, you'll be hissed in the history books. I think we talked about persistence, but I'd like to take it a next level. Coming out of the pandemic, we need to have grit. I need to have people who will just try again and again and again until they succeed. And I think this is important to make sure that people are successful, and they'll understand they will fall and they will come back up and try again and again. You can, succeed from the first time. And as we always say, lessons learned. So I think these are the skills that people have to have. And we need to make sure that people, regardless of what we're trying to predict, whether it's data scientists or fintech specialists, these roles will come and go and change. But we need to make sure we have at least the bare minimum of skills that's there, and where you are placed in the organization, what job title, that will come along with time.
Thank you, Mahmoud. Yeah, so to the audience there, I'm just sharing an article which I referred to, that is the LinkedIn Learning Report of 2021, the English document. So in case anyone is interested, you can just click that link. Probably it will take you to the that detailed, beautiful report. So, but again, people are concerned in this pandemic, like how relevant I will be, and what can I do for the organization. So I like to hear from all of you from different perspective. One is to remain employable, like we all need income. But in these disruptive times, as and when we move ahead, what should people do? Like, for example, if I am, whichever role, if I'm in my learning role, if I'm in a role of head of an institution, whichever role I am, senior, junior, middle level, whatever it is, what should people do to upskill and reskill themselves? Now, as an individual, what ownership I should take?
Okay, so let me go first.
Please.
Go ahead, Adam.
I think remaining employable for me, I think the main driver should be curiosity, because in everything that we do as individuals, I think when you're curious, you learn, and you always stand out, which would be the main driver, right? I see individuals who actually come across certain things and they spend a bit of time trying to find out what that means to them and how it impacts them. Just by doing that first step, I think it creates the difference for individuals. Now, that's one step, being curious. I think another step would be, we usually come across colleagues who are actually content, right? Who are content in what they do, who are content in where they are. And it becomes very difficult to take them out of that mindset. Now, when you go past curiosity, then there comes a period of time when your mindset needs to shift, because all of these combined together will drive you to be successful. So if you are not, if you're a person who doesn't have a growth mindset, who has a fixed mindset, right? A person who believes that you're very limited, a person who doesn't want to experience, or a person who's adverse to failure, I think this plays against you when we're talking about reskilling and being the best for tomorrow, right? Because what tends to happen is you're limiting yourself and your abilities. So in order to do as well as you can, in order to make sure that you're at the top of your game, there should be an investment in time and effort, but there should be an investment to also be able to adapt. We've been speaking about adaptability, but these are key things that, you know, as human beings, we need to evolve as everything around us is evolving. So I think for me, the curiosity part, the mindset shift, and just being able to try things out, to experiment, and to ensure that you're doing it, you know, as organizations, we also need to provide a safe environment for that, and a conducive environment for people to say, I am willing to explore, because that's how we all grow. But if you're crucified for failing or for, you know, experimenting and it doesn't work out, I think that in itself, it deters people from going out and doing what they need to do in order to survive in any organization for that matter, or in this world. So I think providing that conducive environment as employers is quite important. And that's what we try to do, right? In all our organizations. So yes, so I'm going to pause there.
Thank you, Adam. Yeah, two important things, and one is evolving and curiosity. That stand out for me. Mahmoud, do you like to add some thoughts on that?
I think we just need to, like I said before, we need to also focus on why we're here. We need to go back to the decision makers and say, we're here to make people better and quicker and faster in their job, and the ROI and the money spent on them. And I think that's, when it comes to decision maker, these are the most two important things that they always look forward to. How we engage and how we deal with different platforms that comes along. I think we need to make sure that, to your question, how people are relevant, I think pre-pandemic, you've seen who are engaged and people who are active and people who are disengaged. And I've seen the same happen also on remote working. So that hasn't changed with the same different groups of people. I think also in change management, you have an early adapters, people who just adapt the technology quickly, probably I would say 10, 15%. And then the silent majority, the next 40, 50% will come along at some point, and then the last group. But you need to drive and focus on that first group. These are the early adapters of people who will push, whether it's learning or any other technology, and see the positive out of it. So I think that's what keeps people employable. I think it hasn't changed, whether it's pre and post pandemic. If you're engaged, if you're quick, if you're adaptable, if you're flexible, you'll get there. If you're not, you'll stay where you are.
Thank you, Mahmoud. That's helpful. And I just like to hear from Michelle. Michelle, like being in the center of learning, providing support to organization. How have you seen the change happening in the learning, especially, for example, from the people side? What is driving them to the learning platforms?
Well, I think where we see it working most successfully, because we are a best of breed solution that fits with lots of other solutions, we get the benefit of seeing how people use lots of different platforms out there in the market. And where I see it most successfully applied within an organization and rolled out is when you have internal champions. And obviously, you know, learning and development and HR are at the forefront of this as the promoters and the purchasers of these platforms in the first place. But really, by leading by example for continuous learning, lifelong learning, upskilling, reskilling, then you encourage the workforce to do the same. So you have two aspects of it. You have how the leadership handle, promote and champion that learning, but also then how the learners themselves respond to that championing of new ways and new habits, exactly as you've alluded to previously, Adam, in your comments. So I think really, you know, it needs to be making an exemplar of what's good, or when someone fails, it not being an issue, just try again. You know, showing people that by having initiative, being motivated and caring about what you do, that's a good thing, and promoted internally, and other people to see that, to encourage them to have a go and try different ways of learning and adapting within their roles, but also moving to different parts of the organization. Some absolutely fantastic examples from you, Adam, about how you're reskilling your tellers. If I may ask one question on that, how did they respond? Because we're very much talking from a top-down approach here, you know, of, well, you can't actually, we can't sustain this role anymore because there won't be a job for you in another year's time. So what's their feeling about this? Are they happy to do that and reskill, or do they just say, actually, it's not for me anymore?
I don't think that option was there, right? I think if somebody comes face to face and tells you, I'm sorry, in the next year, there's not going to be a job for you. And then you also use data, right? If you look at how many customers do you have coming to you in a day? It used to be maybe 20. Now you have 1. Sometimes you have 0. So what does that mean for you? So I think we didn't even need to get to a point where we had to convince them that this is actually reality and this is happening. I think, so very excited actually. We when we came up and said that we have identified that, so as a bank, we've identified about 14, 15 roles initially.
Right. And
said that these roles are going through a transitional phase. And we've done that in the past 2 years and said that, you know, we've sat with the business and we've understood that in looking at the 3 to 5 year plan, as we move through a digital phase and moving our products and our services digitally, would we still need to have these jobs, or would we still need these platforms, existing platforms that are currently running? And if the response was no, then the onus was on the business itself to say that I have people who are sitting here, and how do I uplift them, reskill them to be something else? How do I get them to start shadowing others? How do I get them to build business acumen around other things across the bank, to be able to say, oh, I have interest in this, or I actually enjoy doing this. So how do we do that? And I think the conversation just evolved from there, and we're able to actually have robust conversation around how do we support your career growth, your own development, and your aspirations. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Michelle. So it is tough, and probably I'm requesting the audience, please, we are closely reaching to the Q&A session side. You can please raise your questions in the Q&A, or you can raise it in the chat. Khadija, thank you for your thoughts on the group of people who have to still report to work. And still, however, it is really difficult, honestly. I understand, and I'm with you. So bring your questions and these in the chat. And before moving into that, we are mostly in the pre-pandemic period, we always focus on learning management systems. Now there is a shift which we are seeing, and the industry is coining the term learning experience management, LXP. So, Michelle, this question, I'd just like to get your thoughts on what is the difference which we are seeing in the LMS and the LXP, especially from a learning environment?
So traditionally, learning management systems have been compliance systems, and there's been some pretty hideous versions of them, I have to say. And anyone that does compliance training, I'm sure within financial services, if I'm allowed to say, can be a little bit boring and tedious. So you log on and you go and you try to work your way through some kind of system that you don't understand very well. You take a course and you go away and you think, thank goodness I haven't got to do that for another year. Whereas learning experience platforms are this about what we're talking about today. It's this facilitating that self-directed learning, but not just sticking someone in and saying, right, off you go and find something that's relevant to you. It's about presenting them with learning that's relevant to them and their job role. And as I alluded to earlier, the first generation of learning experience platforms, which is not bad at all, is about recommending content based on interests and job roles and perhaps some other data points. Whereas we're now moving beyond that and we're bringing in much bigger data sets because that data is available. In LinkedIn Learning, for example, you can imagine they have so much data on all of us. Anyone that has a LinkedIn account, they look at what we do, what we learn, who we interact with, what we comment on, and all of that data is fed into the taxonomy that they're building. And other companies are doing the same sort of thing. And that can drive very intelligent recommendations because they have the data to back up the pathways that they recommend for the different job roles and the evolution of skills. You must have seen the future skills for 2025, I think it is. So World Economics Forum and LinkedIn Learning recommend very, very similar skill sets. Lots of them have been mentioned today. And these platforms can facilitate that kind of learning through different learning content providers like us, like LinkedIn Learning, Udemy, Open Sesame, all the different names that you know of off-the-shelf content. They create an ecosystem environment. You can plug all of those content providers in, use the recommendations engine, and then intelligently recommend content. And as I say, this is becoming more sophisticated. Learning management systems, episodic learning, virtually, obviously online. However, it's time bound, it's regular, people have to do it to comply. Generally, the systems are quite old and clunky and not very user-friendly. I mean, my question back to the audience and to you guys is probably, do you need to separate those two out? Because compliance will always be compliance, it has to be done, right? Learning experience, do you want to mingle that compliance in with that new way of learning, with the way that you want to promote people to come back and to try harder and to learn new things? Because they don't really go very well together, actually. Some of it is important, of course, to the industries, but the learning experience side of things is very much the future and where we need to be looking towards. So I think there is an argument to say, keep it separate.
And thank you, Michelle. And thank you for that process to separate what needs to be done on a compliance angle and what needs to be done on a reskilling and upskilling angle, especially from the LXP platform perspective. Mahmoud, do you like to add any thoughts on that?
Yes, sure, Phoebe. I think in terms of learning experience or LXP, I think we need to take a step back and make sure the HRXP is there, because the learning is not sitting in a silo. So how you hire people and how you engage with them and how you train them and how you recognize and retain them. So that comes in with that part of where the learning experience is. I mean, we're talking about customer experience. I mean, it's very important how the customers deal with our products and services. So at the end of the day, it has to be replicated with our staff, because you can't have a different bad experience or classical learning management systems where you just log in and you click on e-learning and finish it. I think you do that basically using gamification. And gamification is an important tool to make sure let's say the dry KYC content is more relevant to the learners, and you make sure that they know how to do know your customer in much more fun, interactive way. I think we need to use data, how people are engaging with these platforms, how frequent are they going in. And to do that, I think HR specifically, and not just learning, needs to adapt and bring AI. Artificial intelligence in our HR systems need to be part of our HR system. So we know how people are interacting with these content and these, different way of the employees using all these systems, whether it be learning or anything else. And that includes obviously the future where I can see everybody's on YouTube and TikTok. Video learning is going to be very, very important in the next few years. More and more content will be in video, but most importantly, the most customized. Yes, there will be off-the-shelf content that you will provide by experts like Michelle, but you need also to tweak it and customize it to make it relevant to the organization and the different segments of the population.
Thank you, Mahmoud. You mentioned about the TikTok kind of learning experiences. We will come to that, and that's interesting. And before moving into that, I'm seeing some questions in the Q&A and also in the chat. Zahir, thanks for your thoughts on, I believe working remotely has decreased micromanagement and improved self-management. Thank you for that comment. I think it is not a question, but there is a question which Zainab has asked us. And it is the second question in the Q&A. To accelerate the reskilling process, organizations should direct employees to the required skills and connect them to the accepted training center or resources. What is your HR organization's plan and execution for that? Anyone like to take that question? Adam?
Yes, Fiby.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So I think there are two parts. We spoke about this earlier, the accountability of the organization, but also the accountability of the end user. And I think it's very important to make sure that they're both aligned. There's a saying, and I'll probably say it wrong, but you can take the horse to the stream, but you can't force it to drink. Something like that. So I think regardless of how much content, how much information, how many platforms, how many training resources organizations have, ensuring that they're fitted to the population or the targeted population that you want the training to the intervention to be addressed to is quite important. Some organizations do have a lot of content. Most of them could be relevant, most of them not. So I'll use my organization as an example, and I think I highlighted a bit of this. So what we did last year was to go through the organization, 80,000 plus employees, and give everybody sort of like a simulation for them to establish their ways of learning, because that was the first part that we needed to do. So once they did that, then we looked at how they wanted to learn, and then we divided what they're going to learn into technical and into human skills, which is the softer skills, right? Because the idea is you don't want individuals to learn what they currently need only. You want them to learn what they currently need, but you want them to also learn what they might need in the future, or what they might find relevant, or where their interest lies. And let me give a valid example. We have, let's say hypothetically, take somebody in HR who doesn't directly work with API. However, they're big on learning about digital concepts, right? Learning how they can utilize things like 3D or fintech in either their personal lives or in their work lives, right? So taking an individual like that, I as a person in HR can actually say that you need to only learn this bit and not that bit. But the person might not have interest in what I'm telling them. And this is how we advocate for future roles. Because if I see that the person is actually in a space where they want to learn more on digital concepts, then it is my role as an employer to say, how do I give this opportunity to the person to excel in a role which they have interest in and not where they're currently in? And this, again, we start speaking about new ways of working. right? So I think, was it Michelle who mentioned that, people go into squads to say that there are projects and you like this project, and as a bank, we should give opportunities like that, right? You're interested in this project, even though it's not relevant currently to your role. However, you think you can add value because in your spare time, you're big on games. You play PlayStation, you play Xbox, and you're a fan of that. It has nothing to do with your HR job at this point. However, you're a fan of that. So how do we give you an opportunity to actually showcase those skills in something like data analyst roles or in something like cyber roles, right? Maybe you like playing things that have to deal with I don't know, security, hacking, and things like that. So that opportunity. So I think when we're talking about the reskilling process in organizations, we need to be very mindful also on the other context that the person might have a different understanding of what reskilling means to them. It might not necessarily be what the organization wants them to be reskilled on. It could be that they wanted to be reskilled on something totally different. So that alignment is very important. So in HR is the conversation, right? The conversation matters. Having the engagement and the conversation to understand your people and to understand specifically individualistic where their interest lies and what they want to learn about. Then you can build a reskilling journey or pathways that could actually take them to where they need to be.
Thank you, Adam. I'm fully reflecting on the analogy you mentioned with regard to the way of how we play with games and other activities in our personal life, and how it can be definitely useful in our work life also, and giving that freedom and choice to the employees. Anyone like to add on? For example, I think probably Mahmoud, do you like to add on that process which Zainab has asked?
Yeah, what Adam was saying, we can use them in testing gamification. The guys are using the PlayStation, so they'll become useful for us. I think it's just a wait and see. Usually some employees wait for the organization to show them what the future skills are and requirements, and the organization has certain expectation to meet and grow the business at the end of the day, because we're a business, we're not a non-profit organization. The visibility by the organization showing what these future skills are. I think that the people need to ask themselves what transferable skills they have and how they can use those skills for different roles. I think most employees get fixated on the job titles and the hierarchy than just looking at skills. And what we found in people, especially in retail banking, who's been impacted by digital banking, they tend to work most likely in retail banking also, but in different roles. You don't see them moving to technology, you don't see them moving to different, because this is their comfort area. They've known the products and processes. And similarly, someone in HR, you don't see them probably moving to legal or treasury. You see them working in some kind of administrator, perhaps maybe in a compliance role. So looking at what transferable skills people would have and how they can use those skills. Yes, we have to give people the choice of what they learn, but at the same time, in financial institutions, we don't have the flexibility of innovation. I'd like to have people learning about photography, but I don't need that skill. I need them to know coding. I need them to know how to know credit and relationship management. And these are the skills I need. And it's the choice for the people if they want to do these roles. And by 6, 12 months, 18, maybe these skills will no longer be relevant when we have to look at something new. So I think it just takes, it's a partnership between the organization and the employee, but it's more and more an emphasis on the employee. We cannot have this pull model in terms of learning. There's going to be more push content, and they have to be self-driven and self-taught themselves to be relevant.
Thank you, Mahmoud. Michelle, any thoughts? How you, from heading an institution, how you see that in your organization?
Yeah, I mean, we're a very small organization, so we all have to be incredibly adaptable. And if something needs to be done, well, we have to go out and learn how to do it. So, and I'm sure there's an element of that right now within much larger organizations because of this shift. But no, I mean, just echoing some of the comments from the other panelists, I think, absolutely, there is the imperative of these are the jobs that have to be done right now. Therefore, these are the skills that are required. If you can couple that with these are your options and these are the opportunities that go with those, I think you can find a nice balance within the organization. And it's about how you tell that story in a positive way, right? So everybody knows the job has to be done. However, if there's some nice stuff that can be done along with it, it makes it a much more pleasant working environment and motivates people at a different level.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Zainab, for the question. And now we have a question from Jacqueline Whitehead. Thanks, Jacqueline, for those questions. Although we have question with the line about reskilling workers, what advice do you give to assist line managers to ensure they implement the development or shadowing that we talk about? So I think this is more from the internal support from the other departments, which Jacqueline is trying to highlight. Adam, Mahmoud, any thoughts?
I think I think people leaders have responsibility as much. I think when an individual, so it first of all starts with the individual themselves. When they build a growth plan on what they would like to learn or what skills they would like to build, I think it is the responsibility of the line managers to keep them accountable on that growth plan. So part of the things that we do as a bank at the beginning of the year, as you set your objectives, you also set a growth plan. And the growth plan, again, is against the learning framework, 70% self-learning, 20% learning from others, and 10% formal learning, right? So that's the learning framework. So these growth plans are built on the learning framework. As you go through the year and you have conversations with your line managers, they actually keep you accountable on that growth plan, which you as an individual has actually built for yourself, and taking accountability that these are things that you want to learn throughout the year. So I think by people leaders, line managers holding individuals accountable on what they had said at the beginning of the year also helps in making sure that there's a structured, being it reskilling or upskilling process ongoing for individuals. I'm talking about growth plans, but this is something that we put across, the whole organization and said everyone needs a growth plan, right? Because again, that is going to support you in what you want to do now, but also support you in what you want to do in the future. And as I'm evaluating your performance, I also need to evaluate the things that you have put on your growth plan. Has it been things that you have achieved? The same way I evaluate your values as a person. Are your values linked to the values of the organization? Is your performance as per your objectives? And is your growth plan delivered as per what we had agreed at the beginning of the year? I think the accountability part is what line managers should really concentrate on, but they should also make it available for people to know what is out there, right? And this is the sharing of information and giving the people, their teams the opportunity to actually spend time learning. And this is a challenge, right? So I just want to spend a minute on this. One of the things that comes out of a lot of conversation is I don't have time. Time is a luxury I can't afford to spend on, learning platforms or to, absorb content. So I believe that, as people leaders, as line managers, we should also be in a position to say, these are dedicated time slots or periods that we're giving you as an organization to make sure that you actually spend time learning. I think that's very important because to say that, use your weekends to learn or use after working hours to learn, that in itself doesn't promote or motivate individuals to actually go in and get to learn certain things, right? But when you're saying that during your working hours, there are dedicated times where you take a break and you make sure you go and learn a thing or two, micro-learning, bite-sized learning, things that doesn't take you hours to do, but things that can take you maybe 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes to 45 minutes and learn on that. I think giving the opportunity for employees to do that, that also works towards supporting in reskilling and upskilling our workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Mahmoud, do you have any thoughts on the question from Jacqueline?
Yes, I think organizations need to put specific tangible learning KPIs that will be part of the performance management, because you can't have the performance management sitting in a silo away from the learning KPIs. So make sure your people development is connected to the performance management. And you see some organizations, there's no connection between them because the performance management is typically linked to financial and to controls, and the people development and learning part just sits separately or not measured very much effectively. I think I empathize with many line managers that they don't really have the time because they have to manage these people and the attendance and get the numbers in. But at the same time, the way they typically, we used to say, come interview the people before the session and after the session and see what they've learned is not happening at the moment with all these different platforms that their employees are accessing it. It's not absolutely realistic for me to ask me to go and access my 50 people what videos and what e-learning they finished. I think we need to use the data that we provide to them and say, this is what your people are learning, and this is what's effective to make your business grow, your operation more efficient. Because at the end of the day, we're enablers. We're here just to help them and support them. So using as much as data as we can to show how people are engaging. And finally, on the there's a question of how you make sure the leadership is engaged. It's very simple. Start top down. Most of the programs I see is just starting bottom up, and it doesn't really work. If you start top down from the executives all the way down, they do the e-learning, they access the video learning, they go to themselves, and they show these are very important organizations. The rest will follow.
Thank you, Mahmoud.
And Fiby, if I can just add to what Mahmoud just said right now around leadership, I think also doing programs that are leader-led changes the narrative. I think it's very important to have the leaders be out there and actually lead some of these interventions, because then what it shows is you're leading by example. So, and then you as a leader also understand the concepts of what you're trying to bring to the organization. So you know how, so we spoke about in our organization for majority part of the last year, we spoke about inclusion and how do we drive that. And part of the things that we did was to actually have people leaders be the ones who actually play the most in this space and be the ones who makes the pitch around inclusion. Because I think it starts with the leadership, right? So you can't have a people leader stand in front of you and tell you how we as a bank need to change behaviors and how we need to be more inclusive, and turn around and does a 360, right? Because that in itself is something that we will all frown about. So having the people leaders lead in this conversation is actually quite important.
Thank you for those insights. Now, as there was mention about the TikTok way of learning and other things, I just want to get the technology perspective which Michelle can provide. So the question which I just like to have here is, how are mobile learning technologies evolving? What trends in the industry you have observed recently, Michelle? Yeah, you're on mute.
There we go. I also see there's an XAPI question here, so I can kind of add, combine those if you like. Yeah. So I think the thing with mobile learning is that actually it shouldn't be seen as something on its own, because it's part of what we do every day in everything that we do. So, when we commuted, people would consume information during their commute. Now that may have been something to listen to because it was recommended to them by a line manager or a colleague or something, or it may just be based on their own interests. So that's your mobile learning component. And then you go to work and you may be required to do some learning on a system, or you may have some information fed to you whilst you're going about your daily activities. So, corporate learning as a whole is probably predominantly on a laptop or a desktop device. However, because of the generations that are coming into the workforce now and are in the workforce now, it's actually just part of our whole life. So it shouldn't really be seen as something that's separate. You shouldn't develop something separately for mobile learning unless you are a service orientated business. You have frontline staff, maybe, restaurant, retail, something along those lines, who actually can't sit in front of a device. But for your sector, for example, where people are predominantly sat in front of a device, well, it can be more of a signposting activity. This is available, this is interesting, sharing things through social learning with your colleagues, which they then consume potentially through their own devices, if that's the case. However, the XAPI point, if I bring that one in now, I think, you know, if you're asking people to learn something and go and find their own learning and log that against their continued professional development, then XAPI, yes, of course, becomes a very important part of that in order to log the time and the resources that they're consuming to keep up to date with their continued professional development. So just basically, XAPI is a way of sending what they call a statement to a learning record system. So I'm a learner, I have a profile on a learning record system, and through a browser or through an application on my phone, I can say, I've consumed this learning, it took me this long, and this is the link to it, and that records against my record and goes towards my achievements or my KPIs, for example. So I think in terms of learning as a whole, yes, we have learning going on to TikTok now. I've seen a few of the it's good fun, it's engaging. I think there's a place for it. I think there's definitely some things that will not fit well with that kind of learning. I think you've got the live sessions, which are really interesting. I see that in the top left here that we're streaming to YouTube. There's definitely a place within the learning space. However, I don't think that it's something to get caught up in per se in many of the sectors, because it happens organically. So you don't necessarily need to think, I have to develop something separate for mobile learning. It needs to be compatible across different platforms, and that's primary.
Thank you, Michelle, very much. So there are interesting questions coming again in the chat. I will just, there is a question from Khadija. Khadija, in case you can just make it a bit more clear, it will be helpful. How can we get the organization to allow us to take the opportunity? And I'm not clear about that. If you can make it more clear, we will address that. Then there is a question that from Muhammad Jubail, that is, what are the success factors to apply learning experience and personalized learning? Anyone like to take that one? What are the success factors to apply learning experience and personalized learning? Maybe something missing also. Yeah,
feedback. I think we all have an LMS, the post-training evaluation, where we measure the feedback from the learner. So that's a tool we can ask them to the system if they evaluate these programs and how relevant. I think the SMEs that we are developing these programs for, interviewing them and speaking to them, maybe having focus group, they can also guide us if we're in the right direction and if it's relevant in terms of the content. But it's very important to strike a balance between making things fun and gamification and make sure it's relevant to the business, because you don't want one side going over the other. It can be a lot of fun, but it's not relevant. It can be relevant, but very boring and disengaging. And I think the latter is where we had before in the past. We tried to move it more towards more engaging and more gamification, specifically for the millennials, the new employees, the 21-year-olds who are joining us and older. They're the ones that are very much engaged in these different platforms. There's still going to be ways you need to measure your credit and your heavy content in terms of risk management and operation risk management. That's not going to be done through an e-learning or a video, perhaps with an instructor who can do a post-assessment with the learners and see the experience before and after and how they can apply that in the job.
Thank you.
I'd also,
yeah,
just to add to that point, I think that, you know, so a success factor is, so is what we're doing working? A good measure of that would be engagement of employees in their day-to-day work and in the learning that you're presenting with them. But also, just going back to the upskilling and reskilling point, when these job roles start evolving, and as they are now, but even more so, you know, in the coming 12 months, have you got the right people to go into those job roles? So if your learning strategy that you're putting in place now is right, then technically in 6, 8, 12 months time, you should start to see applicants who have, you know, 80% of the relevant skill sets or 60% of the relevant skill sets. They've got the motivation, the aptitude to learn. Therefore, well, we can just upskill them in the rest of it. But if you're not, then I'd say that's time to look at the learning experience and the strategy that goes with it to support the upskill and the reskill. So you do have people ready to go into these roles as they emerge.
I think if I just add to what Michelle was adding, I think we need to think a bit outside the box and we look at learning retention. We have tools, you know, when people are looking for certification, they're looking for scholarships, and these are retention tools of from a learning perspective that can keep people going for, say, a period of 6-12 months and they get qualified. And we don't tend to use that very much effectively. It's not very much structured. I think we're busy in the digital world, but still people need the PMP and the CIPD and the CFA, and these are good retention tools. And that will make sure that people are very much engaged and very much active in their job, and they feel pride in these qualifications they've earned. And we need to take time and recognize them when they earn these qualifications. And we've worked with ABFS several times, and they helped us in recognizing many of our employees in terms of these global certifications.
Thank you, Mahmoud, very much for sharing that. And I know we are coming to the close of the time. So there is a question which Muhammad has raised. As we are all aware that upcoming technologies like blockchain and AI will replace many jobs, specifically technical domains like accountancy, etc. What do you think, how as an individual we can cope up with that? And as an organization after implementation of these technologies, will management replace their high-skilled officials, because might be the human intelligence is not that much required due to the availability of AI? Very long question. Anyone like to quickly jump on?
All right, let me take a shot at this. So I think the good thing with human skills are, you will never have technology that can show you empathy. You will never have a technology that shows any emotion, let's put it that way, that shows any emotion for that matter. You cannot also, or you can, but most of the time, we're not at the place where technology makes the decision, right? These are human skills that are very relevant for all of us. If you, so if you have a high skilled talent pool, the idea is, again, back to the initial conversation. How do you invest and enable an environment of upskilling and reskilling them? Now, you will not upskill them if the current role is actually going to be redundant. You are going to reskill them into something else that they could do, right? You know, initially I spoke around how, you know, there's some roles that as we move along, we're establishing that these are going to be very relevant for the future, right? So if a person currently is doing a role, so Mohammed has mentioned accountancy, so playing with the numbers, and you know that this is going to be something that could be done digitally and doesn't require human interface. The idea is, how do you take this individual who you have identified as a key talent and sort of support them in becoming ready for the role that is coming up in 6 months or 12 months or 18 months as part of a rescaling journey. So it's to build those pathways for people to be aware. So as organizations, I think, to just simplify this whole process is to make sure you have an enabling environment where people can actually identify that this is my current situation. This is going to be my situation in 6 months to a year. And how do I make sure that I have opportunities lined up to get to a position where I still find myself relevant? I think that's the whole idea. Very simple.
Thank you, Adam. And I know we are over the time, but I just want to ask one quick question, and in a very short answer, it will be definitely helpful. What should be the next steps in upskilling for an individual? What he or she should do? I just like to start with Mahmoud and then go with Adam and then close with Michelle.
My answer is very simple, Phoebe, just do it. Just do it. Because if you're waiting for your boss to tell you, or you're waiting for an organization to drive you, which is obviously, this is also a responsibility, but let's not kid ourselves. As organizations who have limited budget, organizations who don't spend a lot on their training, go do it. Nothing is stopping you for you doing it online, offline. You will get yourself registered and get ready when the job is available in your organization. But just waiting for others to do things for you is not going to work. You need to just do it.
Adam?
I agree. I think you should be curious. You should make sure that you know what the future skills looks like. and then you should go for it. But, you know, be open to receiving and accepting that things will change. And yeah, just make sure that you're curious enough to ask the right questions and be in the right places.
Michelle, and also probably from a technology perspective, someone like to reach you. If you can also give the contact in the chat, it will be helpful.
I think, you know, there's not much more to add, because exactly, you just need to get on and do it. But I guess the bit that you perhaps will help you with that is to find out what you're interested in. Actually, what do you care about and what interests you, and therefore will motivate you to learn, and then try to form that habit of learning. 10 minutes a day is enough, actually, to stay up to date in the developments in the areas that you're interested in. And you'll be astounded at how your conversations will evolve and progress just based on that 10 minutes a day of reading what's happening out there related to the things that you're interested in. You will suddenly become the knowledge of that subject matter expert amongst your peers, because you've invested that time in yourself.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Mahmoud, and thank you, Wadda. And before all of you leave, we have a poll to be released. And Zain, can you just release the poll at this stage, please? Yeah, so this is regarding how it was. So on behalf of the Institute, I like to thank Michelle. Thanks for taking your bank holiday today and joining us from UK on a Sunday morning. And Adam, thanks again for joining us today for this insightful thoughts being shared. And Mahmoud, thank you very much. And I like to thank all the people who have joined here, who have asked wonderful questions. And let us meet for the next conversation which we are having. We haven't taken all the questions. Some questions we have to skip due to the time constraints. Stay safe, stay strong, stay blessed. It is a bit of tough time for all of us emotionally. So be strong, and I'm sure we will be moving across and be on the other side of this pandemic. So keep and utilize the learning opportunities which you are having in different platforms. And I like to thank all the panel members for today. So thank you very much, Mahmoud. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
And thanks to all the participants, and hope to see you soon next time. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You can disconnect. Yeah, that's fine.